Hey YouTube, Ryu here. Um, I decided to go ahead and make at least the first part of the where World of Warcraft went wrong. Uh, little mini series, I guess. Um, Now I want people to understand something about this. This isn't me sitting there and saying that World of Warcraft has always been shit or anything like that. In fact, it's quite to the contrary. Um, I think they really had a winning thing, and I mean, time's proven that. If it was a crappy game to begin with, it wouldn't have become so popular. It wouldn't have been so influential on our modern day games. But also, as time is proving, and as their subscriber count is proving, they screwed up somewhere along the line. Somewhere along the line, they had one bad idea, followed by another bad idea, followed by another, and it just snowballed. And that's usually how these things happen. But I want to go ahead and make it perfectly clear. Vanilla World of Warcraft. Absolutely loved it. Hell, Burning Crusade. Loved Burning Crusade. It had a lot of unique features to it. It had a lot of unique mechanics. We saw the first instances of bosses actually really having special things that you needed to do, really needed to plan out the bosses. Whereas with vanilla Minecraft, you didn't really have that. I mean, it had it on a couple of them, but it was very, very rare. Whereas with Burning Crusade, it was pretty much there the whole time. There was something for every class to do that was fairly unique to them. And it also kind of separated out the farming areas because certain enemies were weak against certain classes, yada, yada, yada. So honestly, I absolutely loved Burning Crusade. Where I really kind of started to feel World of Warcraft holding itself back was with Wrath of the Lich King. Now, like I said in my previous video, absolutely loved the Death Knight. And it really saddened me to see them lose a lot of what made them unique, and having it nerfed into the dirt, making it nothing more than a meh tank or meh damage dealer, or some bastardized hybrid of the two. I mean, yeah, they had their place in a party, but that place could easily be better filled by another class. So I don't want people to walk away from this little mini-series and think that it's me just absolutely hating on World of Warcraft, because at some points it's going to feel like that. At some point, people are going to be like, damn, this guy absolutely hates this game. I hate modern day World of Warcraft. I don't hate the old World of Warcraft. In fact, if they were to go ahead and start up servers where certain servers went only to certain expansion packs, or maybe they branch off the expansion packs to something different on there, I know it would fragment the user base, and I've had an issue with that in the past. But at this point, you've got your people that enjoy World of Warcraft the way it is now, and it would really piss them off if World of Warcraft was to suddenly go, oh, okay, mulligan. Not to mention, it really wouldn't be fair to those people who actually bought the expansion packs, paid the money for it. But if they were to go ahead and do a kind of server split that way, I would definitely be on Burning Crusade server. in a heartbeat. Hell, even if it went all the way up to Wrath of the Lich King, you know, and then they branch off where Cataclysm did happen, Cataclysm didn't happen. At that point, I would go with the one where Cataclysm didn't happen because of the pure and simple fact that I liked how they had all of the customizability with the other players. I mean, hell, I had a priest that I could tank with. Okay, that was absolutely amazing. I don't know if you can still do that with priests. Like I said, I haven't been on since a couple of months after Cataclysm came out. So I don't know all of the changes that they've made to the classes. I don't know where they're currently sitting. All I can say is what got me to quit playing World of Warcraft. And I was one of those people. I would get home from school or even all the way up, you know, when I was working, I would get home from work and I would hop onto World of Warcraft and play. It's all like, if I'm not working or at school, eating, going to the bathroom, or sleeping, I am playing World of Warcraft. And even while I was at work, I was thinking about World of Warcraft, you know, what I wanted to do, what I wanted to get done that day. How much time I had to play in the day so I could plan appropriately. I was a huge fan of the series. But that ended up all changing with Cataclysm. And I've already covered why. That was in a previous video. I recommend that you go back and watch that one. But let's go ahead and start with something fairly simple. You do not, I'll repeat, you do not completely change the mechanics of an established class. Not when you're that far in. Maybe if you're just launching the game and you find out a class that you had is completely broken, and the only way to make it not completely broken is by changing either all of the other classes or changing the mechanics of that class. That's the only time I could see someone justifying it, and it would be a really hard sale. But so that's one of the biggest things, and I don't care. Like, if they had gone through and changed the mechanics of warlocks, I would have been pissed. I would have been all like, no, what you need to do is you need to nerf a few of the abilities to make them a little bit less of an unholy terror against every other class other than Paladin. And only because Paladins can make themselves completely immune to all kinds of damage. Alright, so honestly, I think I've pretty much touched on that enough given my past videos. Like I said, if you want kind of more of an example of what ended up happening, go ahead and watch my previous video. So we'll move on. The next one, again, I've actually somewhat addressed in my other videos. And in this, you're going to hear some things that I've mentioned in other videos before. In fact, I've mentioned a lot of it. It's been very fragmented. I'm kind of consolidating it all down. The second way that they really screwed up was they made it so that crafting was only going to be useful for a very finite period of time, and only going to be useful during the first days of expansions. Now, alchemy kind of is a special thing on that, but only to a certain degree. Because there's very specific potions, and they're all the very high-end potions, and usually it comes down to people that have bots will go ahead and basically corner the market on that and make it impossible for someone playing legit to actually be able to turn a profit from the effort and actually make it worth their time. And by making it worth your time, I mean, now you've got a lot of people that sit there and say, oh, if you go out and you farm your materials, then everything's pure profit. That is complete and total bullshit. Let's get that right out of the way right now. And I'm one of those people, I've crafted in a lot of games. There's always extra costs associated with it, whether it be tools or even just straight up time. Like, for example, on my hunter, I was able to go ahead and farm up gold insanely fast. So for me to make a profit off of alchemy, and I'm not even going to sit there and say, oh, the time it was sitting in the auction house. The time that I would put into there, if I was out just farming gold from regular mobs or, running a dungeon solo, something along those lines, would the profit that I would get counteract that? That's the biggest question. And I'm going to warn you right now, I'm going to actually make some comparisons between Final Fantasy XI and World of Warcraft more than likely. Because Final Fantasy XI kept along the same thing, and their game lasted for quite a while, and in my opinion remained much more fun, much more interesting for a much longer period of time. And a lot of people will sit there and go, oh, well, you're just a fan of the Final Fantasy series. Actually, I was a fan of Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, and 11. All the rest of them, couldn't care less about. I was a fan of Final Fantasy 7 because of the materia system. I was a fan of Final Fantasy 8 because of not only the gunblade system, which I found pretty cool. I found that to be a pretty cool addition to the turn-based system, or live action system, whatever. And as well as the aspect of drawing magic from enemies and also slotting that magic. So as you used magic, it actually really did weaken your character. That was a pretty cool thing in my opinion, and I really enjoyed that little balancing act. Then there was the with Final Fantasy IX, I found it extremely unique that you learned your abilities by wearing gear and actually going through battles and gaining experience with that. I think it was just AP, ability points. But I found it absolutely fascinating. And I found it extremely fun to go ahead and find that piece of gear where it's all like, okay, I have to decide, do I want to put it onto this character so they can get this ability? Or do I want to put it onto this character so they can get this ability first? Or do I want to put it onto this character who's not going to learn any abilities from it, but benefit most from the stats? I found that insanely fun. Not to mention, I actually liked the card games, but, and here's the kicker on that. In Final Fantasy VIII, the card game was fun at first, but then when you would get, these BS rules from other regions, and all of a sudden, now that you've gone to that other region, you played a card game in there, which you had to do to go ahead and get some of the best cards, all of a sudden now it's kind of a Russian roulette as to, what rules are going to be going on back at home. And I despise that. Like, if they had different rules in different regions and you had to travel back and forth between those regions, then fine. But the fact that different rules would spread to different regions, it really screwed up the game, in my opinion. It made it so certain cards were absolutely worthless that used to be absolute god cards, and then it made certain cards that you absolutely didn't have any use for would all of a sudden become the make or break of a deck. I absolutely hated that, and it really ruined the pacing of the game. With Final Fantasy IX, however, that was a different story. They basically had the same rules, just a different, just differing difficulty as you progressed. So I really enjoyed that. And with Final Fantasy XI, when I first bought it, it actually came with Tetramaster, which was the card game from Final Fantasy IX, and I absolutely loved the game. It was fun to play. I wasted so many hours into that. I would be initially going in to play Final Fantasy XI. I'd see Tetramaster and I go, all right, one game. 6.5 hours later, oh, well, there goes my allotted game time. But that was kind of a cool thing. Sorry about going off on the tangent. Now, we also have a few issues as far as what I was talking about before, where, certain materials can be bought from other people. People were all like, well, if you go ahead and you buy this material and you make X amount of potions from it and you make X amount of money from it, then you're turning a profit. Well, not necessarily, because what about the other materials? Basically, what it was I would go ahead and look into the market. I would see what the materials would cost. I'd add up all of the materials, and do worst case and best case scenario for crafting. And if I could not outright buy the materials from the market and turn a profit, it probably wasn't worth my time. Because farming materials definitely wasn't worth my time, because I was able to farm gold so quickly. So at that point, it ended up being me going ahead and crafting these different potions and flasks for my own use and to give to my party if they were having a little bit of a hard time or something like that, if I felt that they really needed it. But that was also me being selfless, because that always came at my expense. People would normally, pay bottom dollar at that point for it. They wouldn't even pay me enough to make up the cost of the base crafting materials. So, and I know that's kind of a capitalist way of looking, because, yeah, all right, I'm not making as much profit. I'm not making any profit off of the flask per se, but I was making profit off of the run, so me helping my team do better should be the payment right there, because we're now being more efficient. Well, when it's a 2-hour flask and the instance takes a half an hour to run, and we're only running that one instance together, or they end up bouncing out to do something else halfway through the instance, well, then it's not paying for itself. So that's a big issue right there. And there was no recourse against those people other than me just not partying with them anymore. And I ended up getting a pretty big block list, and I would go ahead anytime I would get into a party, whether it be a random match party or what, I would go ahead and check the names against my block list. And if any of the people were there, I'd be all like, no, I'm not running this if this person is here, because they have fucked with me in the past. I actually had a text document stating the reason for them being on the block list. I was a little OCD about it, but hey, it served me well. But I never had that issue in Final Fantasy XI, because people tended to be fair, because they didn't want to rip other people off, because sooner or later they would get ripped off. And it was one of those situations of, hey, we're all in this struggle together. Yeah, people are trying to make money, but it's a competitive market. Supply and demand was actually one of the biggest things. Whereas with World of Warcraft, there are items that are there that are in extremely high supply, relatively low demand, and yet they're still priced astronomically high. Tended to be crafting items. Um, but yeah, there were people that just had a lot of problems with all of these mechanics, and they ended up leaving the game. So all of a sudden it came down to only being a few crafters, and the fact that it made almost no difference is really telling as far as the value of crafting. Screw up number 3 was definitely them going ahead and basically giving out max level characters to people who hadn't played with a character like that before. So you ended up in parties where you're going in up in the upper levels, and you've got a person that you're all like, all right, this is a fairly easy dungeon, not a problem. And all of a sudden your white mage is only casting their major heal instead of casting multiple smaller heals as maintenance instead, but then they on the first trash pull. And you think, okay, well, maybe it's been a while since they've played, so let's go ahead and just go ahead and keep going, because you can't sit there and ask them, hey, have you ever played this before, or is that a purchased character? Because 9 out of 10 times they're not going to be honest with you. They're going to be like, no, I leveled this myself. Well, that's a big issue, because then on the next trash pull, they again. Something that a experienced character wouldn't do. Especially not on trash pulls. There's no excuse for on a trash pull. There's none whatsoever. And like I said, I played as a tanking cleric. Now, I can see, maybe running a little low on mana if you're a mage or something like that, but even then, you should either have the gear to mitigate that or the items to mitigate it. There were a lot of items in the game where you could go ahead and restore quite a bit of mana very quickly. But that was a major issue, because you had people coming in that had no idea how to play a character, and the only way for them to know the nuances of playing the character is to level up their character through the levels and come up against those different scenarios. Even power leveling, they would get quite a bit of valuable experience, because you can only power level to a certain level, and then you actually have to really grind your way up, at which point you're going to learn the workings of the character. Is it going to take blood, sweat, and tears? Oh, yeah, many. But it's the price you pay to learn a new character. The next screw-up that they had was they allowed their people to play very specific characters. Basically, what it was like if I ran my own company that was like Blizzard, and I had a team working on a game, and people were going to be playing that team, I'd be all like, all right, you're going to go ahead and you're going to do that. Well, we're going to allot a few hours for you to go ahead and play during your work time. And the reason why we're going to do this is we're going to go ahead and have you make one of each character. And it's going to be random which character you play. So at that point, these people are going to sit there and go, all right, maybe making these characters completely overpowered isn't going to be all that interesting, because it's not going to be very fun for whenever I randomly get thrown into something else. And yes, I'm making a reference to them actually having a horde warlock in their office. A big statue of one. That's an issue right there. Especially since horde warlocks, orc warlocks to be specific, which were the most overpowered warlocks in vanilla World of Warcraft. And that is saying something. Because warlocks just in general were overpowered, whether you were Alliance or not. They were just overpowered, but the Orc Warlock, their ability basically made them invisible when they popped their... invincible when they popped their... racial. And, yeah. I never heard of them nerfing that. And then on top of that, they ended up getting Blood Elves, which... Good God. I'm glad that they actually nerfed the Blood Elf ability a little bit, but they didn't nerf it anywhere near enough. I mean, it was definitely one of those scenarios of you're making this character way overpowered, you're giving them a lot of boosts, you're giving them their mana back, you're draining your opponent's magic, and basically leaving your opponent completely... helpless, regardless of what your opponent is. And that is a problem. You cannot have one specific setup or two specific setups only on one side of conflict that's good against everything that they come across, that they can always mitigate it 100% with minimal effort, and then claim to be fair. Then claim to be doing things in the name of balance while not addressing that. That's a big issue. And that's a problem that Blizzard has had for forever. And I think it comes down to them not forcing the people making these decisions to go ahead and actually play as the team's getting raffle stomped. Not for lack of skill, not for lack of effort, but just because the game's programmed that way. So, this is part one. I don't know how many parts this is going to be. There's quite a bit to cover. And like I said, these were the basics. These were the things that just really stood out. I'm not listing these in any level of importance. I'm just listing them in whatever comes to mind first. So I guess they're listed in level of importance to me since they're rising to the top of my brain there. But, yeah. I'm definitely going to go ahead and continue this. Hopefully, people will go ahead, comment on it, If you have any personal experiences that I haven't mentioned in a video yet, go ahead and leave it down in the comments. I'm probably going to be releasing these in fairly rapid succession. I don't know how rapid it's going to be. But by all means, feel free to go ahead and list your experiences or list your gripes. Or if you think that I'm misrepresenting something, remember, this is... if it happened after, or even towards the end of Cataclysm, I have no experience with it. I don't care. I'm talking about what made me quit and how they screwed up. Now, if they've corrected something, by all means, mention it. But don't sit there and say, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, because it's not like that anymore. You're not nullifying my point. The thing is if they made that mistake initially, then they made that mistake initially. And I'm going off of not only my personal experiences, but what I observed other people going through. that I've heard other people say as well. And off of their actual patch notes. So, I mean, if you're going to fanboy, don't waste your time. Because if you just want to come in and insult, you're going to get ignored. Alright, talk to you later, YouTube. I'll see you later on in the series.